Duke, you suck.
You shut your mouth!
Welcome to the Duke, You Suck podcast. And now, Duke Durango. Hey everybody, welcome to the Duke You Suck podcast. I'm here with my very special guest, former NDP MLA Graham Sucha. Graham, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on. Cheers to you, my friend. We're having a drink together.
Cheers, sir.
A fiscal conservative and a liberal getting together having a drink in this day and age. Boy, I'm sure that somewhere there's a universe exploding.
I know, eh? Yeah, or at least we'll get some haters on Twitter. But...
yeah, with any luck, right? At least we can generate some, and that's the thing. At least I want to generate a conversation, right? Like, I remember the truth is, I'm just going to quickly go into how I actually became aware of you. And then, because it's going to blend into how you got into wrestling. So how I became aware of you, first of all, to make this about me, Graham, is I was in the locker room at a show, and everybody knows I'm a pretty conservative guy. Especially, like I say, fiscally, and the boys come in the back, and you can tell they're excited, and they're like, "Hey, Jordy, there's a politician coming to the show tonight," and I'm like, "Oh, who?" And they're like, "He's an NDP MLA," and I'm like, "What?" I'm salivating at this point. I'm like, "What's his name?" And they're like, "Graham Sucha," and I'm like, "Hey, point him out to me. I'm going to be on this guy." Like, and you come to the show, and I can tell just when you sit down, like the way you're sitting right in the front row, and you seem like just the nicest guy. I'm like, I can't give this guy any shit.
Oh man, I would have ate it up if you gave me shit, dude. You were a great, I guess are you retired now, Duke? Or
yeah, man, I'm done.
You were an amazing heel. If you ripped into me, I would have ate it up. It would have been the greatest thing.
Yeah. So that's one question I've always had is how did you, I looked at your background a little bit. You were into theater, did a lot of theater in high school, started out as a theater major in university. What got you into wrestling? Was that the theatrical part of it, or how did that go?
I don't know. I was watching it since I was in middle school. So I don't know what got me into it per se. I think my earliest memory, I remember watching A Channel, and they had just gotten jacked or some WWE show that was there. So I started watching sort of mid-Attitude Era, like Austin and McMahon feud time.
Perfect time
so after Bret Hart had left, actually.
Right. Okay.
So I started watching it then, and I enjoyed sort of the theatrics that came out of that. And then A Channel started picking up Stampede Wrestling.
Right.
And they're showing it at noon on Saturdays. And so I started watching that and enjoying it. And then as it progressed, my father grew up watching Stampede Wrestling, like seeing the Hart Kids and Dynamite Kid and Chris Benoit, if I can say his name.
You can say his name, man. We're not promoting it, but that's the truth. Right?
Yeah.
Like
but he grew up watching like these amazing wrestlers, Cuban Assassin, Bad News Brown. And so anyways, he saw this as a great way to bond with me and for us to get close. And so we started going to wrestling shows together and went to like the Ogden Legion Hall for them. And one day I convinced him to take me to Toronto for WrestleMania when I was in high school. So
can I assume that was Rock Hogan?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Veer. Okay, we'll come back to this other stuff. What was that like?
Oh my goodness. There are many things I remember of that show and just the overall feeling. And like, I have never, for the first time ever, I'd never been in something that massive, like that many people together, all kind of there for this one really exciting thing. I have goosebumps speaking about it right now. But I remember just the excitement about it. Like we were on the floor, but we were far back, so the view sucked. Like we watched everything from the big screen near the stage.
Right.
But to be there and see the atmosphere was everything. And when the Rock Hogan match happened, it was loud for 20 minutes. Like the television audience doesn't give it justice. And people were so into it that the moment that match was over, everyone was dead, like done. We were ready to go home.
Yeah.
Because we had all burnt like 40 minutes of energy on this one match. But it's also like, if people don't remember, like the WCW WWE feud was huge, right? So no one ever thought they'd get to see that match.
No. Well, and that's, you know, it's the crossover. One of the cool things used to be about boxing where you could see different champions fight each other, sort of thing.
Oh yeah.
And unfortunately, wrestling, everybody's so protective. And actually, Doc Luther and I actually had an interesting conversation about this the other day, about, you know, the promotions always wanting to protect their talent. And to me, it's like, what's the worst thing? Somebody else brings eyes to your product. You know what I mean? Like but that to me is one of those, you know, so many times you can't get the dream match because of these promotion rivalries, right? So that's awesome. Okay, so now let's come back to how you sorry. So back to you and your dad bonding over wrestling.
Yeah. So we went there, and I ended up somehow tricking him into doing it because he had a friend of his who was visiting him for his 50th birthday.
Okay.
And they announced WrestleMania in Toronto that weekend. And so at the kitchen table, we're all sitting together, and I sneaked that comment in. I said, "Hey, Dad, WrestleMania's in Toronto. We should go." And his friend chimes in and goes, "Oh yeah, you can stay with me."
Oh.
And so it was just, you know, it worked well in my favor there. But yeah, it was just, it's been something that we've always enjoyed. When I was going to university, I remember my dad coming out and me surprising him with tickets to the house show at the Ottawa Civic Center.
Nice.
I think Bobby Lashley was standing in for John Cena at the time. And then just going to a lot of the other shows like PWA when I discovered it when I got back. So
right, yeah.
So while you may have gotten the hype that I was at the show, I have been going to those shows all the time. I just got a new job. But
well, and I mean, this is going to sound ridiculous, but people don't understand sometimes how small the shows were. So the fact that I kind of don't recognize you from those Stampede days, and maybe you were there after I left because I did leave for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I was kind of like, geez, how do I not recognize him?
Well, I was tinier and didn't have a beard, but
yeah, that's why. You know what, man? Yeah, we need to work on. I don't know how to do this kind of stuff, but we need to change your Wikipedia picture too while we're at it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, because I guess it's Babyface on there too.
Well, and you look a little serial killy. You know what I mean? Like, you know, I know you to be a really nice man, and it's just like, geez, he looks a little. That's got like a Menendez brothers tone to it.
Maybe that's why I had a hard time finding a job when I was laid off. But
yeah, you might want to look into that picture. So it's you look, honestly though, you look like you're about 15 years old. Like you look, you look really, really young.
I got it. Like, that's why I grew this beard in. So funny story in relation to that. We were hosting the Pacific Northwest Economic Region meeting. So it's U.S. senators from the 5 Northwest U.S. states, and then a bunch of provincial politicians, and we're negotiating trade and all this stuff. And it's just before Stampede's about to end. And I had been called an intern and a staffer for the first year of my career because I was 20. A, I was young. I was 28, 29. Yeah. And B, I looked like I was 17.
Yeah, you were young and didn't look your age, right?
No. And so I realized, like, in the US, like, most of those politicians are extraordinarily old. Like, they get into that job and they stay for a long time. So they're in their 70s. And I went, I don't want to be called an intern anymore. And I grew in the beard before the meeting. Oh, okay. So I looked older. And then, and I've had it for the last 5 years. And it was literally just as that sort of to give me that step up when we're at the negotiating tables trying to negotiate trade deals. So,
well, I guess, yeah, too, because you're in a position where people are looking for leverage. So if they think you're a kid, they're going to try and push you around, right? Which must be inconvenient because then you have to always push back, which is a pain in the ass.
Yeah. And we were in that time of Trump era politics, right? Where it was that heavy, like, buy American, like, sort of strong nationalistic viewpoints. So you had to be very strong and not be willing to back down at some of these meetings. Right. And when they were done, and it was pretty casual, like we were having cocktails together and socializing and talking about our families. But when we were at the table there, it would get heated sometimes. So.
Is that right? Now, and did you find that, say the 5 states, was it a reasonably even split? Part of me assumes up in kind of, especially when you're dealing with Montana, that were those safe to say those are red states? Do you know what I mean? And then, of course, so they're really pushing the Trump agenda, I guess, down your throat.
Well, you know what? The funny thing is a lot of them didn't like his style of politics. And so you see that rift in the Republican Party, but, and so you have sort of them balancing an act of two things, right? Like the disdain they had for his kind of politics and what he was doing. And then on the other hand, you had them realizing that his voters voted for them, and they still had to represent those voters if they wanted to hold on to those seats. And so they had to, I did not envy them trying to balance that. So they had to get those sort of Trump-esque wins when they were doing that, while still trying to counter the fact that some of Trump's policies were going to hurt their state too.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is, you know, it's hard to say, yeah, I like his agenda when a guy's that polarizing, because whether, like you say, even if you appreciate some of his policies, you know, even if you don't, if you're pushing the party agenda, I mean, like say, it could be the difference in not getting elected at the next time. And when you're a career politician, when that's how you're kind of living your day-to-day life, it makes it really hard to sort of, I don't say step away from the party line, because I think they all align with the party for a reason, but it makes it harder to sort of speak out, you know, when something within the party doesn't sound right.
Yeah, well, and it's always tough too, because we sometimes are in the nature of being so hyper partisan that if the other side says something, we automatically say it's wrong or we disagree with them, right? And yeah. I was at a meeting once with some executive from the American Federation of Labor, right? So they represent all the union people for most of the US states. And the thing she said was, the most dangerous thing we could do is dismiss everything that Donald Trump says. Yeah. And the reason why is because he did, especially in 2015 or 2016, he did polarize with a lot of the working people. And he was saying things that they were upset about. And a lot of it was in relation to the fact jobs were being exported out of the country. And factories were being opened up in Mexico where they were paying them pennies at the dollar. And they were upset about it. And you could go into the arguments about saying how hypocritical it was for Trump to say that, because he's, you know, investing in companies that might be doing the same thing. But
yeah, I'm willing to bet none of the bed sheets. I'm willing to bet none of his bed sheets are made in America.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like, you know, I mean, the thing with Trump is, I know some farmers in the States, and under Trump policies, they, you know, socially, and they live in a conservative community. Socially, they can't deal with him. Like, they can't stand Trump. But he openly admits financially he did much better under Trump. You know what I mean? So there's that side of that argument too, where, you know, socially, I have no problem conceding he was an absolute disaster, you know, but financially, for some people, you know, his policies worked. And I think that's what you say. Like, it's so funny you bring up that point, because I was talking to a friend the other day, and I raised the point again with the gentleman I was speaking to online today. And I said exactly what you said, that I don't understand where politics has gotten to a point where it doesn't matter what policy either side, and it's not one or the other. It's everybody now. It doesn't matter what policy it is. There's a problem with it, or a way it has to be done our way better. And I just said, like, the fact that the other guy could be 100% wrong all the time is a statistic impossibility. Do you know what I mean? It's we need our politicians to really start trying to work harder to find that common ground, but at the same time still be able to make sure, you know, that their base still feels like they're there for them as well. You know, because I don't want to say pandering, you know what I mean? But I definitely, so this is a true conversation I had with a friend. We were out snowshoeing here a couple months ago, and we were talking about Jason Kenney. Yeah. And one of my issues with Jason Kenney, and I have no problem telling you I voted for Jason Kenney just because I was concerned about fiscal policy. Social policy is a disaster. I think it's safe to admit that. Having said that, we're out snowshoeing, and I said, until, you know, one of my concerns with Jason Kenney is he's not an open supporter of LGBTQ rights. And I don't want to make it sound like I go around banging a drum. I don't march in the parades. Like, I don't want to come across the wrong way. But until you're a leader to all people, you'll never be a true leader. And I honestly feel that way. And my friend's response was, well, what about his base? What, you know, he'll lose his base. And I said, you know what, man? I use the same argument for fighting in hockey. That if you stopped fighting in hockey, there's going to be a certain number of people that stop watching hockey. But most people watch hockey for hockey. They don't watch it for fighting. And the people that don't watch it will come. And I think the people that will leave are fewer than the people you gain. So if he comes out and openly supports these rights, that doesn't mean you have to march in a parade. You just have to make sure that people understand that you want to make sure that every member of our society, no matter what, is treated equally under our laws. And it's a minimum ask of our elected officials, in my opinion. And I said, if he does that, I believe he has more voters to gain by doing something like that than voters to lose, right? Like if that's what you're losing your voter on, that voter is running on a pretty thin margin, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that sort of constituency, well, it's a strong base, and I think, to be honest, if anything has to play with it, it's likely money. That base does donate a lot of money,
right?
It's the challenge in relation to that base is the numbers of them are going down and down and down, right? That base is fleeting, right?
Yes.
Like, because a lot of them were, to be frank, old-fashioned elderlies who were my grandparents' age, who are no longer with us, right?
Yeah, it's an aging population.
Yeah, and so it's going away, and even then, like, a lot of people who were opposed to these same-sex marriage 15, 20 years ago have seen it in action and gone, oh, okay, that's actually not that bad. Like, oh, it doesn't hurt me. Hey, why is it any of my business? It's not my cup of tea, but like, hey, I've changed my mind. And I've, within my circle and growing up in Calgary, like, I've seen that shift of people realizing that, hey, maybe I was wrong. I was kind of a jerk to these individuals for no good reason.
It's just, to me, I mean, I think until all levels of government support all people, I don't think Jason Kenney's a racist, and I don't think that everybody that voted for the UCP is a racist. And do you know what I mean? And I don't think he's a bigot per se. I don't know him well enough to actually say yes or no to that, to be honest, right? But I think when you don't openly stand up for people, it leaves room then for the people that you're leading. Whether you've stated it or not, they take that as, oh, if he's not supporting him, he's obviously against it, and it gives me a little bit of room to be a bigot. Do you know what I mean? And if there's any way we can get rid of that kind of stuff, I think that our politicians really are the front line to that. Until we can change that attitude, I don't think we'll be able to affect behavior.
Yeah, and you know what? Like, and so I remember some of the most heated stuff that I used to deal with when I was in office was when we were doing a few reforms to add trans individuals to the Human Rights Code, and when we were moving policy forward on gay straight alliances and things like that, like just kind of finishing off the movement surrounding LGBTQ2+ rights.
Right.
We used to get a lot of, that was probably something that I got some of the harshest pushback on, but it was a small but very vocal minority.
Right.
And you really have to question what attracts those people to a specific group. And if you're being enabling to allow those individuals into your group or into your circle. It's pretty alarming when, from my end, when I see that happening. And the big challenge is, and I think us as a society have to stand up and say, no, like, we stand for human rights and we stand for the rights of every individual, because these small minorities are so strong and vocal enough that they can really try to influence the pendulum. People don't tend to come out when they agree to something, but they'll come out fast when they disagree with something. And so you have to sometimes, as silly as it's going to sound, you have to sometimes email your MLA and tell them when you're happy about something. Otherwise, they're going to only hear one side of the spectrum, and policy is going to be enabled by the negative, not the positive.
Yeah, that's an absolutely valid point, right? And it's one thing I try to do, and I'm not always the most efficient at it, but when there's something I don't like, I'll have to go, pretty hard in the paint against it. But when I do like something, I like to, I mean, it's no secret, I am not a big fan of Mayor Nancy's. Having said that, when he does something good, I have no problem saying he's done something good, right? Like, and I think if you're not going to say, I mean, what is and what isn't, right? I mean, yeah, life's lived in gray areas, but if something's good and you sort of poo-poo it because you don't like where it came from, well, that's a tell on you, not that person. You know what I mean? Like, it's like I say, I can't be 100% wrong all the time just because I'm the mayor of Calgary. You know what I mean? Like, it's a statistic impossibility.
Well, and it's a statistic and possibility you're going to agree with someone 100% of the time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So.
Well, and I mean, my wife's probably one of the more agreeable people, I've ever met. And even her and I, there's times we look at each other, kind of through the crosshairs and like, what are you talking about? Right.
Yeah.
So actually, I'm just going to pop this question. It just came to me with a municipal election coming up in Calgary. Have you thought about, like, is municipal politics a thing for you? Is that something you consider?
Not right now. So the question of if I'm going to ever seek politics in the general sense has come up many a times, and
right.
And my answer, and I think this is the best way to put it, is Joe Biden is 78 and I'm 34. I got a lot of time.
That's fair. Yeah.
And right now I owe it to my kids to give them some more time.
Okay.
And I'm happy to have had that opportunity to spend some time with my kids, and to be frank, like the pandemic has sucked in many respects, right? Like I wish I could be in the office and going out for beers with my buddies. In some other respects, as a father with the younger kids, all of them under 12, there's been some great moments I've had with them during this time that you'll never get back, and so I'm enjoying that at this moment in time. But who knows what the future will hold?
Well, like, at least it's nice you've kind of found a silver lining. Like, my wife and I both have said the same thing. Like, she's been working from home, up until Christmas. I work in road construction, deemed an essential service. Mm-hmm. So up until Christmas, I was working until we shut down for the winter. But for the most part, I mean, I've been really fortunate through all this. And it sounds like, like you say, you found the silver lining. At least I think that's, there's a lot of people like, oh, I'm shut in the house. Like, yeah, you are, but there's, get a project done. Like, I don't know, figure it out. Like, quit, like, it sucks for everybody. You know what I mean? Like, nobody, when I was a little kid, actually, and I never thought about this till right now. When I was a little kid, my parents generally didn't spank us. We got a lecture and then we got grounded. Do you know what I mean? And that's all this is. I've just been grounded for a year, right? You know what I mean?
You're still grounded right now. That's why you're in the basement.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. I get banished. Like, you go talk to your friends downstairs. Yeah. So now, kind of going back to your early beginnings, I mentioned earlier that you were, heavily into theater in high school and then theater major. What made you decide to transfer over to Poli Sci?
So I was in theater in high school. I actually did television broadcasting in Ottawa.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. Broadcasting.
Yeah. But they're very aligned, right? Like, we were next door to the theater department when I was there.
Right.
And I did television, and it was a crappy time to do television. Not because of, like, the program itself, but because there was so much downsizing. There was a lot of automation being put into place. When I graduated, they had just announced, like, within weeks, that City TV and Bell Media were laying off, like, hundreds of people. And so you're competing with, all these people who've just lost their jobs.
Right.
I was a waiter at the time, and I looked at my paycheck, and then I looked at what the job offers were, and I would be making less going to work for what I studied for.
Right.
So, I made that hard choice to not pursue that. And I did poli-sci for a few years at Carleton University. And then I became a young father. So I had my first kid when I was 22.
Right.
And so at that time, it was time to focus in on doing the right thing and taking care of my family. And I had, had a beautiful kid and immensely had a few more that were awesome. And I loved being a father. But I would need to get back to Calgary, and the quickest and easiest way to do that, and with something I was good at, was through the restaurant. So I became a restaurant manager.
Okay.
I managed restaurants till I won the election, actually.
Wow. Okay. So now, because you were running against an incumbent, right? This sounds funny, but were you surprised you won? Do you know what I mean? Like, everybody's confident they can win, but were you a little bit like, in a conservative province, you knocked the crap out of the conservative incumbent?
See, it was a process, I would say. I will preface first by saying that one does not buy the 50-50 ticket because they don't want to win the 50-50.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
But your chances.
Right.
So I got my nomination quite far out of the gate. So I was nominated for about 5 months. I was running against Wild Rose 4 crosser to the PCs. I was in Stephen Harper's federal constituency.
Oh, okay. Oh, I think I just lost you.
that there wasn't going to be a very strong shot, right? Like I wasn't going to tell my boss off. I was pretty, I was pretty about my possibilities and my chances there.
Right.
But then there was a shift. I was very active. I was door knocking lots. I was pounding the pavement as much as I could. And there's a reason why my riding turned and the ones around me did, and that was the work ethic of me and my volunteers.
Okay.
And obviously the momentum of Rachel Notley.
Right.
But it
Hey, everybody. Sorry about that. We had a little technical difficulty there. I'm back here with Graham Sucha talking about his first run at the NDP MLA position in Alberta, riding the, kind of getting stronger, riding the wave of Rachel Notley.
Yeah. So when we were 3 weeks out of that election, you're door knocking and you're hitting your doors and you're kind of counting heads and you're seeing how many people would vote for you and how many people are saying, oh yeah, I'm going to support you. And I realized as the momentum was building that there was a strong possibility. And then Rebel Media issued a poll a week out and it showed I was ahead. And it was funny because
that must have hurt their feelings. We both can say that. That must have hurt Rebel Media's feelings.
Oh yeah. They weren't very happy about it. I think they released it to try to talk people out of it. But but nevertheless, it was funny because my riding, it's deep South Calgary, Stephen Harper's territory.
Right.
The party dismissed it. I got no resources or anything like that because they didn't think they had a shot at it. And then all of a sudden the phone started ringing and there was activity happening because they saw the momentum and the writing on the wall there too. And and the rest was history, but it was a tough go and we had to work for it. So
for sure. Now, do you think, I mean, because I'll be honest with you, I think two things really helped in that election. At the time, a friend of mine was one of the on a security detail with Jim Prentice.
Yeah.
And he came and we went for coffee, and it was right after Prentice had made that Albertans need to look in the mirror comment.
Oh,
And so I went for coffee with him and I said, hey, you know what? I said, I've my whole life I've voted conservative. And I said, I'm not saying I'm not going to vote conservative in the next election, but I'm telling you right now, Jim Prentice just cost himself that election. He says, what do you mean? I said, well, yeah. I said, yeah, call us jerks for kind of looking in the mirror and voting, but we gave you the checkbook and you shit the bed with it. If that's my fault for trusting you, well, I guess, yeah, shame on me. And sure enough, he opened the door. And then, like you say, going back to the floor crossing, I think that was, the vote might've been already a little bit split, but I think those people crossing the floor, I think that turned a lot of people off,
Yeah. There were a few things that I kind of saw going into that is that people wanted a change. And that was kind of the one thing, because there were a lot of people who were, and a lot of it came from the PCs that were very angry about what happened, and they would confront me on it. And they would say, oh, you shouldn't have won. Like, clearly, like there was a vote split. And my comment to them would be, people overwhelmingly voted for change.
Yeah.
There was a debate on what that change should be, but they overwhelmingly voted for change.
Sorry, my cat.
That is the nature of Zoom calls.
Get down.
So he has the right colors. But,
that's why we got him, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the one thing too that happened, and there was a poll that came out right after the election, and they polled voters of all the party, and they said, if your political party of choice wasn't there, who would you vote for? And if the Wild Rose wasn't around and it was just the NDP and PCs, the NDP actually would have got more votes. They would have got more seats than they did in that election.
Right.
And I think on the polar end of the spectrum, the same was there. If the NDP wasn't there, the Wild Rose would have won that election.
Right.
So,
well, and truth is, I mean, I honestly believe if Danielle Smith in particular didn't cross the floor, you know what I mean? That's something to this day still kind of rattles my cage. Not because she crossed the floor. I mean, that was one of those, for political ideology, I can't say why she would or wouldn't make that decision. That's hers to make. But crossing the floor to me is a little dodgy. And the reason I say that is, and I'll use, those people that voted conservative just because they were conservative for 44 years. It doesn't matter who's running in that conservative chair. They're voting for that party. Do you know what I mean? And so when you decide to cross the floor, you kind of, my feeling is that you actually waste that person's vote. They gave you your vote on one thing, and then you said, well, no matter what your vote cast, I'm going to go do this. And it's, that's what's best for that person, but maybe not what's best for the constituency. But I also don't know enough. Maybe that's what the constituents are asking for too, right?
It's so for some of them, I think there was an opportunity. For others, I think there was some ethics around it.
Right.
I think, and for others, I think it was a mix of both.
Okay.
And I think they did it for some of it. It was done for the right reasons, but done the wrong way.
Right.
You have to recognize, and this is how the Reform Party was founded. The Wild Rose was kind of founded on this. It was a mix of a lot of people who had a lot of different ideas who were just kind of sick of the current government, and some of those people came from the left. Right. And some of those people are describing themselves the same way you're describing yourself, which are strong fiscal conservatives, but socially liberal. And some are very staunch libertarian. And if you're a textbook libertarian, you're okay with same-sex marriage because you don't want the government to interfere with anything. So why should the government mess around with who I can marry?
Why do they care about that?
Yeah.
Right. And you know what, man, I'm almost getting to the point is like, why does the government care what drugs I use?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, not that I use drugs or any, you do or don't, doesn't matter. But like, who says you can't do cocaine? I don't want my kids doing it any more than I want my kids drinking alcohol. But if I can put on a hockey helmet, skate down a hockey rink 30 kilometers an hour and get drilled in the face with a shoulder, why can't I do cocaine at a party on Friday night? You know what I mean? Like, that's where kind of I become really liberal. It's kind of like, just let people do what they want to do, because I honestly, more government intervention means the government's telling me they know better. They know more about what's good for me than I do. And I have a tough time with that. You know what I mean? Especially when the population's gotten so big. It's so hard for these poor politicians to stay in touch with all their constituents, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And, we could go into, there are so many side conversations there, like the war on, like, you could argue the challenges in relation to the war on drugs, but you can also argue that we've learned so much more about the mental composition of what people do, right? Like, part of treatment is falling off the wagon sometimes.
Right.
And so, like, do you want to risk falling off? If you're in treatment and you fall off the wagon and you're doing an illicit drug, do you want to risk going to jail by coming clean and saying, hey, I accidentally did this? Exactly. And continuing your rehab? Or do you want to, do the process and try to get better? And there's been a lot of success in a lot of countries that have decriminalized those drugs because it actually allows people to get clean. And instead of you pumping a lot of money to police chasing down people who are doing illicit drugs, they can put that money in rehab.
Well, and that's kind of my whole thing is, I mean, prostitution's not going anywhere. Drugs aren't going anywhere. These things are controlled by organized crime. And that's not, so my attitude is, organized crime is still going to be involved in these things. To assume they won't because it becomes legalized is simply foolish. But at the same time, if we legalize it, then we can tax it. And like you say, then we have, people say, well, how do we pay for all these clinics? Well, because we legalize it, we tax it, and that tax money directly goes to treatment facilities, and these types of clinics where we can help these guys get clean, get back into society, and get back on their feet, because everybody needs a second chance. You know what I mean? Just because you're, man, like there, but for the grace of God go I, is kind of my thing. Like, am I a heavy drug user? No, I'm not. But thank Christ, that doesn't mean I never tried cocaine. That means I never got addicted to it. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I definitely sympathize. And I think that's where a guy like me has a hard time, because people are like, I've got friends on the conservative side. Well, no, you can't pay for that. And I'm like, well, we can, but we have to legalize drugs. And they're like, well, we can't legalize drugs. Like, okay, so you'd rather just spend money chasing it.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, like, when someone says we can't pay for that, you go, well, you already are. You're paying for it in other ways. You're paying for it in social services. You're paying for it if, a parent has a problem and isn't getting rehab and has their kids taken away. You're paying for it if when police have to chase after these individuals and they end up in jail, or if someone is seeking a fix and robs a house.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, one of the things that really opened my eyes was, I'm not Joe World Traveler by any stretch of the imagination, but probably one of the biggest eye-opening things for me was actually Amsterdam. Do you know what I mean? My wife's family's Dutch, and she still has family there. So fortunately, when we got there, we got, some people showed us around, and one of her cousin was married to a doctor. So he had a really interesting perspective on things. And one of the things he got me to understand is drugs here are still illegal. The police just tolerate it. Like, unless you do something really stupid, he says, because we choose to treat the symptom, not the problem, right? Like, the person's got an issue, we'll fix that. And he told me, and I haven't, if this is on Final Jeopardy, don't use it as your answer. I didn't research it. But one of the things he told me is they have so much room in their prison systems, they lease space to France.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So that tells me they're doing something right. And they'd say, oh, really protect yourself when you're in the central area at night, blah, blah, blah. I felt so safe there, and I'm sure there's a nefarious element anywhere there's tourists, but you know what I mean? It's they choose to simply let it happen, but they control it by just letting it control itself, because people know if they get out of hand, they're going to have a real problem.
Mm-hmm. It's funny, we were talking about, that reminds me of like growing up in my neighborhood, and earlier before we jumped on this call, we were talking about where we grew up. And the one area where I live now and where I grew up, it was always great because we knew our neighbors really well. And so, you could break a bylaw and it'd be okay because your neighbor knew you were good for it. Like, if you were cleaning out your garden, you had a pile of garbage behind your garage, like, that's legal. Yeah. But you could do it for a week because your neighbor knew you cleaned it up and they wouldn't call bylaw on you. And then you get certain areas where it's like people are sticking their noses up, and the moment that you slip up, they're going to make a phone call. So it's kind of that community nature of taking care of one another.
Well, and that's one of the things I think that's kind of being lost. Do you know what I mean? Is, that sense of community. And I think, with COVID, one of the things where I actually I was kind of happy to see a little bit of a bonding with communities is when, there was a sense that people felt the government wanted them to tell on their neighbors if there was a social gathering at their home. Mm-hmm. And again, this platform isn't to say whether that's right, wrong, or indifferent. That, they have information I don't. But at the same time, it was actually cool to say people like at least stand up and say, well, I'm not going to rat on my neighbors because they're my neighbors. And when the heat comes down, that's what I'm going to turn to. The government's not going to be there for me. And it was like, I hope the government will be there for us, actually. Having said that, at least you recognize that your neighbor's there for you, right? Like there was that small little like, okay, I had all this BS. At least I can see that you're thinking of your neighbor at this point. Mm-hmm. Because it's like you say, I remember being a kid and getting in trouble and the neighbor catch you and the neighbor would paddle your ass. And then you get home and you'd be crying. Your mom would be like, what happened? You'd be like, neighbor paddled my ass. She'd be like, what'd you do? And then you'd tell what you did and then get your ass paddled again.
Yeah. The neighbor had made the phone call to your mom just before you got home.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Your mom was hanging up the phone as you walked in the door. You're like, oh no. Yeah, man. It's, yeah, it's such an interesting time because there's so much change going on that how do you keep up? How do you adapt? And the thing is, what's funny is it's funny for me, myself, because I think of myself just as an everyman, and to watch a guy like me try and catch up. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm right at that, I've kind of got a foot on each side of the, racist jokes were still funny, but now, they're not. And it's up to you to make that change now. You know what I mean? So things are changing really fast, but I think people are doing their best to adapt. Do you know what I mean? But on the extreme right, there's not even and both sides, I guess, extreme right and left, there's not even a want to adapt, or to see the other guy's point. I honestly don't know what to do. I literally what do we do? How do we bridge that gap?
Some of the best people I've interacted with, especially when we're dealing with LGBTQ rights, and I was trying to learn the issues a little bit more because I was unfamiliar. Some of the best people who work within some of the communities know that if you're sincere and you're well-intentioned, they'll be okay if you slip up, and they'll correct you as long as you don't get defensive when you get corrected. And I think that's the thing that we have to, and we have a human nature of fight or flight, right? Like that, where it's instinctual from when we were cavemen or women. So when we're put into a position where we feel vulnerable, we're gonna instinctually, our adrenaline is gonna go up, and we're gonna get ready for that. And you have to recognize when that's gonna happen and pull it into check. Because for most people, if you're sincere and you want to fix, if you want to support other people, be prepared to be corrected, and on the other side, recognize that people, if they're coming in with the best intentions, they might make mistakes. And if they're open-minded to fix the culture of that, then that's good too.
And I think that's a good, it's people are resistant to change. People say like the good old days. And this isn't my thought, but somebody mentioned the good old days, and it was even geared. I've seen a couple of these things related to when was America great. You know what I mean? You think back, okay, the good old days when times were simpler, when you could slap your wife and you know what I mean? And black people couldn't drink at the same water fountain as you. And it was just like, yeah, those were the good old days. This is what we're hearkening. You know what I mean? Like, think that's bullshit, quite frankly. You know what I mean? So, and I think that people that want to like harken back to the good old days need to kind of understand that while it was the good old days for a lot of people, it also wasn't the good old days for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I had some friends over the other day, and one of the things that is a hot topic all the time in any country, in Canada, United States in particular, is First Nations treaty rights and things like that. And that's always a hard conversation. And to be honest with you, my friend was taking a pretty conservative stance on, kind of how we should handle the natives and what they, what we've done for the natives and things like that. And I just said, hold on a second, brother. Like, and this doesn't mean I'm not a racist. I want to make this very clear. Like, I know I'm a racist because I've told racist jokes, but I also know I'm not a racist because racism pisses me off, if that makes sense. Having said that, he kind of like, I kind of explained to him, I said, hey man, I have friends whose parents were in residential schools. That's still a really fresh wound for them. You know what I mean? Like when your parents were kind of had to, get beaten because they spoke a different language or acted a different way. You can't express that. Like there's no way we could possibly ever understand those types of wounds. So to ask a guy like me to say, how do we make restitution for that? I don't have the first clue how you make up for that. You know what I mean?
I did a lot of work on sort of some of the reconciliation pieces that we have, because there are hangovers of our existing residential school issues, and that is our child welfare system in Alberta. So, in 66% of the kids in government care are First Nation kids.
Really?
Yeah, and like First Nations represents like maybe 3% of our population. So it's disproportionate, right? Like,
massive.
Yeah, and those kids are, it's generational trauma that's going down there. Those kids, their parents were in the system, and their parents were in residential schools. And so there's all this trauma, and there's no social supports for them. We're not putting any supports on reserves for any of these individuals. And it's led to this cyclical pattern that we have.
Right.
The reality is, like, in this, and some of the best elders I've interacted with have kind of informed me on this. It took us 150 years to get here. It's going to take us quite a few years to reconcile it, because it's generations we're dealing with, and so it's going to take patience, and it's going to take a lot of understanding. And granted, this is my perspective, but it's going to take patience and understanding for us to get there, because it's very complex, and there's a lot of layers that we have to tackle. And to be completely honest, the federal government is not stepping up where they need to be doing. And the treaties are there, but they're contracts, right? Like, if I buy a house or if your parents buy a house and you move into it after they pass away, and that house been there for 60 years, you still have a right to live in that house. Well, these treaties, we still have a obligation to oblige by them, and our federal government isn't following through.
Right. Well, and I mean, and not to start hacking on the federal government, we're going to hack on the federal government for a minute, because they ran on a platform, of women's lib platform and indigenous right platform, and quite frankly, they've done sweet FA on those files, right? Like, I was talking to somebody the other day, and sometimes with my big mouth, I actually say something that makes a little bit of sense. And I said, here in Alberta, we've got 10,000 pipeliners sitting around with nothing to do. We've got all these indigenous communities that need water. I bet we could pipe some water in there.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, it's how can the dumb, partsman / wrestler think of it, but the federal government doesn't? Well, don't tell me they're not thinking of it. They're just not doing it. Right. And so how do we hold them accountable at that rate? That's another question. Well,
and in some respects too, like, maybe it's also, there's an obligation that our provincial government has in some areas of that. And that was why, when we were in or when I was part of the NDP government, we actually started some of those water projects to First Nations communities, because there's a thing called Jordan's principle, and it was a court case that happened because there's so much confusion over what the province covers and what the federal government covers, because technically, like on reserve, healthcare is the responsibility of the federal government. It's not the provinces. Right. And same with education.
Okay.
But we were realizing that the federal government was doing such a poor job that people were leaving reserve because they needed the services and supports. And so what ended up happening was this thing came out called Jordan's principle, which said, if you identify there's a problem, you pay for it, and then you figure out who pays for it later. And
just
so
get
if
it sorted.
The province has to pay for this stuff and then sue the federal government, then the province needs to pay for the stuff and sue the federal government.
Yeah. And again, when you came on the show, I'm sure, this is one of those things, like, I don't care what side of the fence you lean on. If you can't get behind something like this, I'm going to call you out. I'm going to tell you just you're an asshole. You know what I mean? Like, how can you not, like, that's such a simple and effective philosophy. Do you know what I mean? Just get it done. Right. And that's Alberta, to me, one of the things that makes Alberta great is we generally have a just get it done attitude here. Right. Like, Albertans just want to get shit done. Just get it done. Well, I gotta work. I just get it done. I gotta get back to work. Right. And so, and I look at what's been going on in these First Nations and in the ghettos in the States is the same thing. And in First Nations in the States as well. How can we just be generation after generation after generation dealing with the same shit? Like, I'm going to date myself, but I was listening to the Elvis Presley song In the Ghetto a couple days ago, just driving down the street, kind of thinking about it and really listening to the words of that song. And I realized, like, that song was, I had to Google it when I got home, 1969, that song was written. And that everything Elvis talks about in that song is still happening today. Right. And it's 1969, that's 50 years and not a damn thing's changed. If anything, it's probably gotten worse.
Yeah, I would probably say so too. Like, there is, and the US, like, has the same challenge as we do when it comes to their people of color, where it's generational, right? Like, and in many cases, the people who got incarcerated, they were based off of racist accusations, and then they ended up going to jail. And how can you get a good job if you've gone to jail? It makes it a lot more difficult for you, and then that goes on generational. And the one thing, like, and I'm a proud Canadian. I would carry my flag on the backpack every time I travel. But we also have to be humble sometimes, recognize that the problems that we have in the US, they're here too. It's with, especially in Western Canada, it's with our Indigenous population.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and that's even out, I didn't realize I went out to Halifax, started traveling out there consistently in 2007. And I didn't realize that there was actually a zone in Halifax where, colored people, you will live in this area. You know what I mean? And, like, Canadians think, well, that's an American thing. And it's like, well, no, there was huge slave trade in Ontario, not to just sewer Ontario, but let's sewer Ontario. But racism isn't an isolated issue. And it's not something that, it's existed through the annals of history. It's not going away, but we like to think of ourselves, hopefully, as more enlightened. You know what I mean? And everyone laughs at me because I call everyone brother and sister. And I think it's part of it comes from watching too much Bugger and Hulk Hogan. But but the other thing just comes from, I recognized, probably in my early 30s, late 20s, early 30s, that we're just all brothers and sisters. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's a really hippie philosophy for a guy like me, but it's just and I view that as sometimes I want to punch my brothers in the mouth. Don't get me wrong, but you're still my brother. You know what I mean? Like,
well, and that's why the unions use that term brother or sister. And it's because you don't get to pick your family.
Right.
And so when I move into this house, like, I could, attribute my neighbor as my sister, because I didn't get to pick who my neighbor was. Like, I guess I did pick the house, but I didn't know she lived there when I moved in. And so that's kind of the mantra in relation to that too, in many respects, is that, we're all a collective family in this city or in this country in some respects, and we don't necessarily get to decide if that's going to be true or not.
Well, and that's, that sense of community is part of the thing that's lost. Going back to when my neighbor would beat me, and go home and get beat again. There was a sense of community, because now the moms would go talk over the fence, like, did you beat his ass? Yeah, I beat his ass. Did you beat his ass? Yeah, I beat his ass too. Do you know what I mean? So there was that sense of community, and the people always kind of knew what was going on.
Mhm.
So, I mean, where nowadays, if your kid's acting the fool, and I don't mean you specifically, but if somebody's kid's acting the fool, and I see it and I say, hey, you know what? Maybe stop acting the fool there, little Johnny. And the parents, 9 out of 10 parents are going to tell me to go to hell.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And to some degree, I appreciate it. But to some degree, like, I can remember getting in a fight in school. And of course, the teacher called home. And the first thing my mom said is she just looked right at me and said, what did you do? You know what I mean? And parents today are always, what did the other kids do? My mom loved us. She knew we were, for the most part, we were good kids. But she also knew, what did you do? Because it takes two. Right. And that, everybody's too busy doing one of these now. It's your fault. Right. Like I don't get it. So I want to move on now. I read a very interesting article on your website that essentially said that the oil and gas sector is the tech sector.
Yeah.
And it was actually, it was really enlightening to a hillbilly. You know what I mean? Like, for somebody like me, because I'm always, in Alberta in particular, we hear, tech sector is one thing, oil and gas is another, ag's another. These are our industries. These are, this is what pulls us. And to hear somebody actually marry that with a really cohesive thought was impressive. Can you expand on that a little for me, please?
Well, so you talked about your wife working from home and doing Zoom calls all day from the basement, right? I'm in the same respect. I do communications now, and I'm working in my basement, and I got this is my workstation. Is that tech is getting integrated into everything. So everything is now tech. Before they used to say like, oh, I work in tech. Well, that's almost becoming everything in many respects. And a lot of it's around automation. A lot of it's in relation to the fact that people are using computers, whether it's a restaurant doing inventory or the fact that the cook has a screen that will time how everything needs to be cooked to make sure that, your burgers cook perfectly, to the oil and gas sector. Our computers have become so strong and so cheap and can do so much because they're so powerful that there's not necessarily the need for as many engineers and geologists working on the oil sands anymore, because they can do a lot of that work for us. And the reality is that someone has to code all these programs, someone has to develop these softwares, and someone needs to develop these innovative technologies. And if we don't do it here, all the oil and gas jobs are going to leave Alberta. Because there is nothing stopping a geologist from remotely doing his work from Halifax, and a company and a startup in Halifax figuring out oil and gas.
Yeah, so we'd lose all that upstream, all those upstream facilities.
Exactly, and we have so much skill here that understands the subject. And to be frank, a lot of our geologists and engineers, they have the most informative information around stats and data science and machine learning, that they can easily do these jobs, and they're the experts in their field. So my overall feeling is that we need to embrace the technology industry in this province significantly, because that is the direction oil and gas is going. And if we want to fall behind in the oil and gas sector, and we could go into debate about where oil is going to be, but a lot of forecasts are already saying that we're going to have a ton of hydrogen needing to be used for in the future, as well as natural gas, and a lot of that's here. If we want those jobs to be here and not outsourced to another province or another country, we need to get started on that tech sector now.
Right. So obviously this Infosys moving here, that's something that that was just announced the other day, that Infosys is moving to Calgary or bringing 500 jobs. So that's something that falls into exactly what you're talking about, kind of thing.
I would say so, but it's also supporting our startups and our innovation, because there's a lot of technology that hasn't been developed yet. And are we creating the space for these startups and these ecosystems to exist? Because, we do tout low taxes. Well, you don't pay taxes if you're not making money. So how do you get cash in hand right away? Are we creating the ecosystem that helps encourage investment, gives the right tax credits, gives the right incentives for job creation? Because if you give those incentives, they'll set up here. They'll have to set up here because they're taking their incentive, and then their employees, and eventually when they make money, will go back into the tax base in the province.
Right. Yeah. And I really liked that was a valid point for all us fiscal conservatives and for you people out there that like to bang your drums about tax cuts. Like to reiterate Graham's point, if my business isn't making money, a tax cut doesn't help me, right? Yeah. A tax credit, so that can help me, or some sort of a grant or funding that, like say, will come back in the form of tax dollars later. Having been a small business owner, and I'm sure you're in a position like this yourself, as probably as a small business in and of yourself, people don't realize how much taxes small business pays. You know what I mean? They don't understand, they think that everything's a write-off. They somehow think that all these companies are getting off free and that they're getting rich off. And it's like, well, no, these companies are paying their fair share. Like it's, some of them, we need to get rid of some of the loopholes, but I definitely think that, like you say, tax cuts are a gamble no matter what. You know what I mean? Because even a tax cut, if a company is losing money to cut their taxes, that's not going to hire more people. They're still going to lay people off.
Well, and the main issue I've had is, if you look at a company like, and the big one that's been out there is Husky Oil. They got a huge tax cut and they outsourced jobs outside of the province and laid a lot of people off. Right. And so it didn't necessarily lead to the outcome that we were hoping for. And when it comes to looking at like our tax system, and I would be critical of any government, it was something, I pushed for when I was with the NDP. It's not I don't necessarily think it's the corporate or income tax that we have to figure out. It's our property tax. The property tax is what's pinching things. And people don't necessarily realize that the province controls most of the property tax. They control how we figure it out. They take a cut of it for education fees. And they really need to come to the table and help fix this, because it's not working for Calgary.
Right. And I mean, that's one thing people like to say now. They like to look at the UCP today and blame them for that. And then, there's going to be people that blame the NDP before them. And then, I mean, these are issues that go back much longer than any of the governments that we see today. This, like you say, this needs to be a change in the system. This isn't something that a change in the government is going to fix.
Yeah, and it's an everyone problem. Like, it's the cities and the provinces need to all come to the table and figure it out. Because honestly, I can partially explain to you how property tax works. It's quite complex, because it works off of mill rates, and it has a formula, and it's designed to be revenue neutral. But it also leads to a situation where Grandma has a house in Fairview, and the assessment goes up, and she has to make that hard decision of whether or not she takes out a second mortgage or a reverse mortgage, or if she has to leave that house. And it's, ideally that wasn't what we wanted to set up our system to do, but it's created these very big challenges. Or it's the downtown property taxes has ended because the value is so low, and now small businesses in like the Foothills Industrial Park are seeing double or triple the increases because of the way the formula has been set up. It really needs to be fixed. So.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, it's, as somebody that's born and raised here, we're used to the good old Ralph Klein days. You know what I mean? Where we've seen a lot of privatization, but everybody, he balanced the budget, and everyone hated Ralph Klein because he did what he said he was going to do. But I don't think a lot of people that agreed with everything Ralph was doing, and myself included. I was pretty young. You know what I mean? I was, I think, 19 when he won his first provincial election. And we probably didn't realize what a lot of that was going to do long term. Do you know what I mean? And so now we're kind of in a position where we looked at what was going on. It's like, yeah, we had all this money, but at what cost? Right. And if we would have reinvested it then, we'd probably be in a lot better position today.
Well, and the kicker to this is, Duke, is the taxes were higher under Ralph Klein.
Right.
We all paid more taxes when Ralph Klein was premier. When we were making those hard decisions, it wasn't just hey, we're going to cut services. It was also, hey, corporations are going to pay a lot more taxes. We're going to have a higher tax rate for this. I think corporations are paying 7% more taxes than they are now under Ralph Klein. So it was making those, and I agree in relation to the long streaming of impacts of the fact that we had a lot of deferred maintenance that we're paying for now. But Ralph Klein made those hard decisions in relation to the tax rates too. So,
well, see, and that's the thing is we all romanticize him. Like, I'll be honest with you, I met Ralph Klein twice at different wrestling functions. Both times very, very, very cordial, and he was pissed drunk both times. You know, and I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm not just talking like I could tell he'd had a few drinks. Like he was a little slurry. Do you know what I mean? And I kind of realized like, okay, so this guy, when we talk about Ralph Klein being an everyman, he's an everyman. Do you know what I mean? And so, but I think people romanticize that and forget the aspect, like you say, like you educated me, and that's one of the reasons I'm so glad you're on here. And I've heard that, but I don't think I understood that the tax rate was that much higher. Do you know what I mean? I mean, 7% as a fiscal conservative, that's a big number, right? Like that's, so, and we get on you poor NDP guys about it.
I know. Well, that was the thing we were always scratching our heads with. We were like, but our taxes are lower than Ralph Klein's. But granted, they were low for a long time because once we paid off that debt, we opened up the floodgates of spending, and we opened up the floodgates of lowering taxes really, really low, and not necessarily saving as much money as we should for that rainy day.
Right.
As Peter Lougheed did, realistically, which was, we're going to pay our fair share because we're going to put that money away. And that Heritage Savings Trust Fund, like it's never been withdrawn from, but the interest has. And every year it produces, with the exception of a few years where it's had bad returns, it's produced $2 to $3 billion of extra revenue for this province.
See, and this is where you'll find the other fiscal conservatives will punch me in the face. I don't mind paying the taxes if the services are there.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like people complain that, well, the taxes. Yeah, but I mean, yeah, our medical system isn't without flaw, and there's a lot of fix we could do. But at the same time, if I have a heart attack tomorrow, I'm not bankrupt.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. So if we could pay 2% more to get faster treatment for certain things, more MRI machines, I'd be all over that. Do you know what I mean? Like if you can say, hey Jordan, I'm going to take your money to do XYZ with it, I'm okay. But a lot of times there's these tax increase, and a guy just goes, wait a second, where's all this money going?
Yeah.
So, and I think that's where I think fiscal accountability comes in. Like, one of the things I was talking to my friend about the other day is, why does our finance minister have to be an elected position? Can we not just hire an accountant? You know what I mean? Like I'm sure there's advisors, like, and I don't want to come across the wrong way. Like, it's not like, Joe Cece was just sitting up there in the ivory tower, counting the shekels and writing the books with his social worker degree. But at the same time, it's like, why do we consistently every 4 years, I got to find a new accountant? Can't we just hire an accountant?
Theoretically, you could. The cabinet minister doesn't have to be an elected official.
Okay.
Anyone can be appointed to the cabinet.
Okay. See, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. And I think I've heard this before. I can't recall which countries it is. Someone could put it in the comments here, but there are some countries where they will appoint opposition members to be in cabinet, or they will appoint different consultants to serving within cabinet. It's just kind of become tradition that we appoint an elected official there, mainly because they can answer for the ministry in question period.
Right.
But nothing compels that cabinet minister of being an elected official.
Okay. Yeah, that's something, boy, would I, it's one of those, like, again, I can't be the only one that's had this thought.
Yeah.
As somebody that's horrible with money, and now I have a guy, and the guy tells me, hey, you're bad with money. This is how we're going to fix it. Right. Like, and again, I know when you guys are sitting at your cabinet meetings there at the NDP headquarters, I'm sure there's somebody advising you. I'm sure it's not just 16 guys sitting around scratching their heads trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah. Well, there's two levels of of politics, if you will, within the government. There's the government and the political staff, and then there's the bureaucracy. And bureaucracy gets a bad name, but there's actually functions to it, which is why, we have such a peaceful transition of power. When a government changes, you can still go into the hospital and everything works seamlessly. And so there's the deputy ministers that work in there. Okay. And they never change. Right? Sometimes they do, depending on how partisan the government is. I think the UCP canned a few of them. I could be wrong. But I recall hearing something about that, but I might be wrong in that statement. But when we formed government, people were shocked because we didn't turn over the bureaucracy. They thought we were going to can everyone and bring in union guys. And we went, no, they're good at their job. They're here to serve you guys. And so the deputy ministers remain the same for the most part. Okay. And in many cases, a lot of them within Treasury and Finance were able to consult us and provide us with the numbers. And it was great because, we could look at long-term forecasts, and they could help us compose our upcoming budgets when we're a new government trying to figure out where the bathroom is. So
Okay, that's it. See, again, these are things you're teaching me, and I should probably know at 48 years old and haven't been to school.
You know what, Duke? Some of these things are things that I didn't learn until I got into office, and I consider myself very like the 1% who's very entrenched in what the political scene is. It's a complex machine, and there's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is I always say, like, we always say you get these people standing up on their drums and going to their stupid rallies and acting like fools carrying goddamn tiki torches.
Mm-hmm.
And they all say it's time for a change, and I always say, like, the system's so big, I don't know how to change it. You know what I mean? Like, there's certain things I want to change, there's certain things I want to stay the same. Like, nothing's perfect, and it's going to be a constant evolving machine. And I think that's probably one of the things that we all need to sort of get our head around, as I'm actually saying this, is politics is always going to evolve, and it's not in a really pretty place right now. It's kind of grotesque for the most part, but I think as it evolves, the pendulum will swing back, hopefully more to the middle, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think it will swing a bit to the middle, but the middle will also get redefined. So I think when it comes to a lot of the social aspects and the social policies, I think we're shifting and we're getting there. Because the middle in the year 2000 was, gay and lesbian individuals couldn't get married.
To be clear, I've never felt that way.
I'm not saying you have.
I've always thought misery loves company. Right? Let them in too.
Yeah, but that was the middle, right? Like we had a federal liberal government. We had a lot of, we had new Democrat provincial governments in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. They wouldn't legalize same-sex marriage.
Yeah, that's always been something that always baffled me, to be honest with you. Like, it's, my mom, God bless her, for 2 years, she volunteered, I want to say for 5 years or 3 years, and I was a managing director. Do you know what the Sharp Foundation is? Have you ever heard of the Sharp Foundation? My mom was the managing director there for 2 years. And so she would constantly make me go to the hospices where the AIDS patients were. And it definitely, first of all, humanized that disease to me. Cause I mean, as a young guy, we thought you could get AIDS. When I was a kid, I mean, you wouldn't share a cup with somebody because you thought you could get AIDS. You know what I mean? So to be able to go to one of these hospices and see these people being treated as people was really good for me. And I think at a really young age, my mom was never a racist. My mom was never a homophobe. Essentially my stepdad was a piece of shit. So I essentially kind of cut him out of all that and just sort of looked to my mom for that guidance. And she never was a homophobe, but she never told us not to be a homophobe, if that makes sense. So she was always just kind of a nice person. But then I kind of realized, okay, you need to accept that just, they're gay, or but most of these people aren't here by choice. These are just people. And I think that more people need those experiences. Like, go volunteer at your hospice, go volunteer at the drop-in center, like go help. You want to feel good about yourself, go help someone else.
Yeah. No, and it's very true. I think we sometimes get very sheltered in our reality, and until you've actually seen it and been in front of individuals who've faced significant barriers in their lives, like it's that sort of mantra of you don't know what you don't know.
Well, I mean, when I was a young guy, I went to college, and one of the things we had to volunteer in our community, I went to a small school in Kelowna, and I volunteered at the gospel mission there. And I mean, there's a lot you don't understand, especially at that age, why people are homeless. And then you see like a whole family come in there for dinner and kind of realize, like, man, this is like, we got to help these people, and so I think that's where I became, as a young man, just having those couple experiences really opened me up to the greater good, I think. You know what I mean? Now let's speak about something a little more positive, a little more fun.
Yeah.
One of the things that I thought was so cool, and I don't know if I've ever actually talked to you about it. Let's talk about when you brought up Jinder Mahal after he won the WWE title in the legislature. What was that like? How did that even come to you? Tell me the whole genesis of this idea.
So, I knew who he was, and actually, a old buddy of mine. I actually do like some Twitch videos with video gaming. He actually trained with him when he was in his early days of wrestling training, because I think Jinder Mahal and I are the same age. He was born in '86, but nevertheless, I watched Backlash actually when he won the title and was really excited about it, because as while he was billed from India, as it came from his family descendants, he was born and raised in Calgary. And so, last time Calgarian had that title was Bret the Hitman Hart, the guy right there behind me. So,
that is awesome.
But nevertheless, so I thought I would bring it up and acknowledge it. And the funny thing is I had to use a loophole to do it because I was not up in queue for my member statement, and they only allocate 4 a day. So I had to use this loophole called tabling returns and reports. And so I was tabling reports, which were just news articles of his winning. And I used it as a way to tell a story.
That is
and I just wanted to kind of acknowledge it. I used to sometimes put a few wrestling tidbits into some of our debates or comments sometimes. But nevertheless, I brought it up. I did the tabling. My staff posted it online. And then Jinder ended up retweeting it, and it blew up. It actually ended up on a lot of the wrestling magazines across the world. And so it was funny. If I will be remembered for anything, it's going to be when I brought that up, because I got, I think, 60,000 views on YouTube for that member statement.
Wow. That's awesome.
And I had a friend of mine who I watched a lot of wrestling pay-per-views with, who messaged me and he said, "Hey, you're on Wrestle Talk." And I'm like, okay. But nevertheless, it was just to acknowledge that, he broke the glass ceiling on many respects, right? He's the first turban-wearing Sikh, or at least as he would enter the ring, to win the WWE title. Very few people of color have won that belt. I think it's changed quite recently with Kofi Kingston and Bobby Lashley.
For sure.
But nevertheless, and he grew up in a working class neighborhood in Calgary, and I think it can be, as much as some wrestling fans like to just hate on his reign, and I don't know if the WWE did it any justice. It was still a pretty neat thing to see, and I hope that I know he's had a few injuries, but he can still excel in that area. And I think a lot of people in the Sikh community are quite proud of him, actually.
Well, it's one of those cool things. I mean, News, Bad News Allen trained him, and along with Gamma Jr. trained him, or Gamma Senior trained him and Gamma Jr. And then they came to work for Stampede, and they were a little rough around the edges, right? I'd been around a little bit when they'd come in, and working with them he was a little rough. You know what I mean? And I remember, I honestly can't remember who my partner was, but we dropped the tag team titles. He beat me for his first belt that I can recall.
Wow.
So I literally watched his career from, I think he'd only had a few matches when he came to Stampede. And so I watched him, kind of move to the top of the roster at Stampede, then move to the top of the roster at PWA, and then move to the top of the roster at WWE. So it was really cool to see. And like you say, I know his dad. His dad used to come to shows, and you wonder why Jinder's such a nice man. I mean, yeah, he's a heel and he does what he's got to do in the ring, but he's a really sweetheart of a guy, and his dad's even nicer. Do you know what I mean? His dad's just the greatest guy. I've never seen Jinder Mahal's dad and not smiled. He's just a great guy. He's one of those guys. I love to see him.
Doesn't he drive the bus around during Christmas and drop off Christmas presents for people? I think I've heard that story of him.
Well, and that's he was a career bus driver, and he was. I remember Jinder talking to me because I'd asked him about it because I just liked his dad so much. So I asked him about one, and he said, "Oh yeah, my dad would, go drive the bus in the morning when I was in school, and then he'd be home when I would get home, and then he'd go back and drive bus in the evening."
Oh wow!
You know what I mean? Oh yeah, he was a hard worker. So to see again, like you say, a guy from a working class family, in Northeast Calgary rise to the top of the biggest wrestling promotion on the planet is absolutely incredible. It's fantastic. And to touch on what you said about people pissing on that run, sitting in my chair, it's really easy to say this, but when you don't build a guy up, you unceremoniously put a belt on him because you're trying to use him for a TV gimmick. There's no way you can do that right. If they would have done that even half-assed properly, his run would have been so much better. He's such a good heel. But like a lot of guys in a lot of promotions, just not getting used properly,
Oh yeah. So but
it's
it's remarkable. And I always find that so amazing in those indie promotions to see someone goes from performing in a Legion Hall with with 100 or 200 people there to like being in an arena of, 20,000 individuals just cheering and yelling and on international TV. Like in the last little while out of Calgary, we've seen quite a few, like obviously the earlier ones, like who've been on your show, TJ Wilson and Natalie Neidhart, but even like Chelsea Green has been moving up the ranks. And I think I only saw her like 5 years ago at a PWA show. So it's.
Yeah, I kind of came back around in 2013 and it was all of a sudden, fortunately for the business, there were some ladies in the locker room because Lance had been training them. Do you know what I mean? And so to say I know Chelsea Green would be an absolute lie, but I've been in a locker room with her a couple of times. And I mean, she seems a really, really nice young lady. Like and again, to tell you the truth, I never really met a Lance trainee that wasn't a nice person. So I don't, they were all, you meet so many cool people, but it's so good to watch. I mean, Lance made Calgary kind of a wrestling hotbed again, especially for a training school. It's when the dungeon closed, Lance filled a big void. You know what I mean? And he trained people the right way. I mean, when you look at how many people he's signed or had signed, and where they are within that company now, results, you can't argue with the result.
Yeah, we were we were door knocking in the lead up to the election. I won't say the community so people don't try to hunt him down. Right. But we found his house. So one of the guys I was door knocking with, he was a big wrestling fan. I went, that's Lance Storm's real name. And we go, oh. And unfortunately, I missed him. I wish he was home. I would have just loved to say hi, and because I did enjoy him when he was with the WWE and WCW. So we just wrote a note on my candidate card that said, "If I can be serious for a second, please consider voting NDP."
That's dynamite. That's dynamite. To me, it's a real shame that his, I know why he closed his school, but it's a real shame that he closed his school. Fortunately there's a couple more open in town, but to have a guy that's reached that level to have a wrestling school is something it's invaluable, and no knocks on any of the schools now. Those guys know how to wrestle. It's but to have a guy with his contacts and stuff trying to help guys get in the door is just, you can't replace that. You know what I mean? It's on that note, what's new? What are you doing now? Let's talk about you for a second. What how can people reach you? Tell us about your Twitch channel. Is that something that you want people kind of tuning into and checking out?
Yeah, sure. So it's I work in communications and I work for a not-for-profit, where really our main focus and goal is to connect Albertans. We're doing a lot of advocacy around rural connectivity and rural internet, which is a big problem. And if communities, and if we want our economy to diversify, we're going to need to connect rural and remote communities, or they're going to fall behind, especially with agriculture and agri-tech. For my channel, it's more around professional development. I just keep myself busy and I like to try new things. So we've been running a Twitch channel where we just kind of play video games and we play around with video editing software and things like that. So we're named the Calgary Kids with a Z at the end. It's a play on an old WWE show when the Miz was in town.
Okay.
And nevertheless, we're doing SmackDown versus Raw GM mode as our first go around, just kind of play around. But really, the number one thing is I view it as a way for me to develop my skills, my editing skills, and my video skills. So watch it, make a comment. If I can do something better, let me know, because it's really a way to make myself better and to improve my talents.
Right on. And if people are looking for somebody to help them with their communications and their rural connection, how can they get a hold of you?
I'm on Twitter. You can go to my website, sucha.ca or grahamsucha.com. I think I own both those domains. Okay. On Twitter, you can follow me on Facebook as well too. Those are the easiest ways to follow me and probably the quickest responses.
Right on, man. And on that note, I will let you go, sir. Thank you so much for your time. I'm so proud to have had you on the show. Like I say, you're somebody that we tried to get together in the past and do that little wrestling angle, but we just couldn't work out dates. But thank you so much, man. It was so good to have this conversation with you.
Well, and congrats on the show. And I'm proud to be sharing this stage with great people like Natalia Neidhart and TJ Wilson. So thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you so much, man. We'll talk again soon.
Okay.
Duke, you suck.
You shut your mouth!
Welcome to the Duke You Suck podcast.